The man's name was Cole Matthews, and he was running from a ghost. He didn't know it yet, but his running was about to come to a dead stop on the sun-bleached planks of a general store boardwalk in a town called Copper Creek. It was a place that wasn't on any important maps, a speck of dust in the vast, unforgiving Arizona territory. For Cole, it was just another stop for supplies: coffee, beans, bullets. The holy trinity of a man who has made the wilderness his only church. His horse, Dusty, a mare with more sense than most men he knew, was tied to the hitching post, her head low against the oppressive heat of 1887. Cole was 42, but the desert sun and a deep, gnawing sorrow had carved 52 years into his face. He was a man made of leather and regret, his hands gnarled from rope and rain, his eyes shadowed by the brim of a Stetson that had seen more thunderstorms than he cared to remember. For 7 long years he'd been a ghost himself, drifting from one cattle drive to the next, never staying in one place long enough for his past to catch up. He thought he was good at it. He thought he was safe. He was wrong. As he swung a leg over his saddle, his boots hit the boardwalk with a hollow thud that seemed to echo in the dead still air. And that's when he saw him. A boy, sitting on the top step of Henderson's general store, all knees and elbows, with a mess of sandy brown hair and clothes that were more patched than fabric. He couldn't have been more than 10 years old, but it wasn't his poverty that snagged Cole's attention like a stray piece of barbed wire. It was his eyes. They were a piercing, impossible blue, and they were fixed on Cole with an intensity that felt ancient. They were smart eyes, but they were also haunted by a longing so profound it was almost a physical thing. Cole was used to being ignored. A drifter is just part of the scenery. But this kid was watching him, studying him, as if he'd been waiting for him. Cole gave a curt nod, the way you do with strangers, and made for the door of the store. He had business to attend to and ghosts to outrun, but the boy's voice stopped him dead in his tracks. "Afternoon, mister." The voice was small with a slight tremor in it, but it cut through the afternoon haze like a razor. Cole paused, his hand on the doorframe. He turned, touching the brim of his hat. "Afternoon, son." He didn't want to talk. He didn't want to engage. Small talk led to questions, and questions were dangerous. But the boy wasn't done. He stood up, dusting off his worn-out trousers, his blue eyes never leaving Cole's. "You look like a real cowboy," the boy said, his voice now filled with a strange mix of awe and something else. Something desperate. The kind from the stories. Cole's chest tightened. He'd spent a lifetime trying to be the man in the stories. He'd failed. Miserably. "Reckon I've done my share of cowboying," he said, his voice gravelly from disuse. He turned to go inside again, but the boy took a step forward, gathering his courage like a man about to leap across a canyon. And then he said the words that would shatter Cole Matthews' world. "I don't suppose," the boy began, his voice barely a whisper, "you'd consider adopting me." Cole froze. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The heat, the dust, the distant lowing of cattle, it all faded away into a dull roar in his ears. He turned back slowly, his mind struggling to process the request. It was absurd, insane, a joke. But one look at the boy's face told him this was no joke. The kid was deadly serious, his entire small body trembling with the weight of the question he'd just asked. Adopt him? Him? A broken drifter with nothing to his name but a horse and a past he couldn't shake? "Just for a day," the boy added quickly, as if sensing Cole's shock. "I mean, just for one day." One day, the phrase hit Cole like a physical blow. It was like a key turning in a lock he'd forgotten existed. A lock on a room deep inside him that he had sealed shut 7 years ago. A room filled with the memory of another boy, a 5-year-old boy with the same bright blue eyes, begging to be taught how to ride, how to throw a lasso. His son, little Benjamin. The memory was a white-hot poker to the heart, as sharp and agonizing as the day he'd watched fever steal the life from his only child. He felt the old familiar panic rising in his throat, the desperate urge to turn, to get on his horse, and ride until the sun went down, and the memories couldn't find him in the dark. "Adopt you?" Cole's voice came out like a rasp, harsher than he'd intended. What kind of fool talk is that? Where are your folks? The boy's shoulders slumped, but he didn't look away. That was the thing that got to Cole. The kid didn't flinch. He just stood there, taking the force of Cole's anger, his gaze unwavering. Don't have any, folks. Not really. There's Mrs. Patterson at the boarding house. She looks after me, but she's got her hands full. He took a small, shaky breath. I just thought, well, you look like the kind of man who might understand what it's like to need something real bad. And there it was, a truth so sharp it cut right through the calluses Cole had built around his heart. He did know what it was like to need something that badly. He needed peace. He needed forgiveness. He needed to outrun the ghost of the man he used to be. He stared at the boy, really stared this time, and a strange feeling of familiarity washed over him. It was in the set of his jaw, the way he held his ground. There was a strength in this child, a resilience forged in hardship. He was a survivor just like Cole. Or maybe, Cole thought with a sudden, chilling clarity, this boy was what a survivor was supposed to look like. Not running, but standing firm, asking for what he needed. Against every instinct that screamed at him to flee, Cole found himself asking a question he knew he would regret. Kid, he said, the name feeling foreign on his tongue, what exactly do you think being adopted for a day would involve? The boy's face transformed. It was like the sun breaking through a storm cloud. A brilliant, blinding hope radiated from him, so pure it was almost painful to look at. Well, he said, the words tumbling out in a rush, I reckon we could ride together. Maybe you could show me how to handle cattle proper like. I've been watching the cowboys who come through town, trying to learn their ways. Mrs. Patterson says I've got good hands with animals. He paused, his gaze dropping to the dusty toes of his worn boots for a second, before snapping back up to meet Cole's. I just want to know what it feels like, he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper again. To have someone who cares about showing me things, even if it's just for a little while. The walls inside Cole didn't just crumble, they were blasted to dust. That earnest plea, that simple, devastating wish, it bypassed all his defenses and hit him square in the soul. This wasn't about a kid wanting a playmate. This was about a kid wanting a father. And the ghost of Benjamin, the son he had lost, whispered in his ear. What would you have given for one more day? He knew this was a mistake, a terrible, soul-wrenching mistake that would rip open old wounds and leave him bleeding on the trail. But as he looked at this desperate, hopeful, impossibly brave little boy, he found himself nodding slowly, the motion feeling like it was being pulled from him by some force outside of his control. Tell you what, kid, he heard himself say, I've got some business in town. Then I need to move some cattle to a water source about 10 miles north. If this Mrs. Patterson of yours says it's all right, and if you think you can handle sitting a horse for that long, I suppose I could use the company. For a day. The joy on the boy's face was a supernova. He bounced on his toes, his grin stretching from ear to ear. Really? You mean it? Oh, mister, you won't regret this. I promise. I'm a good worker, and I learn fast. I won't be any trouble at all. Hold your horses there, son, Cole said, but a ghost of a smile touched his own lips, the first one in a long, long time. Like I said, we check with Mrs. Patterson first, and you need to understand, this is just for today. Come tomorrow morning, we go our separate ways, understood? Understood, the boy chirped, nodding so vigorously his whole head wobbled. Should I go get her now? She's just inside helping with inventory. He didn't wait for an answer, darting into the cool darkness of the general store like a jackrabbit. Cole was left alone on the boardwalk, the sudden silence deafening. A wave of dizziness washed over him. What had he just done? He had just invited the past, in the form of a 10-year-old boy with haunted blue eyes, to ride alongside him. The rational part of his brain was screaming at him. This was reckless. It was dangerous. Getting attached to this child, even for a single day, would only pour salt in wounds that had never healed. But another part of him, a part he thought had died with Benjamin, felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in 7 years. It wasn't happiness. It wasn't hope. It was something quieter, deeper. It was purpose. A few minutes later, the boy reappeared, towing a plump, no-nonsense woman in her 50s. She had kind eyes, but they were sharp too, the kind of eyes that could size a man up in a single glance. She wiped her hands on her apron and extended a work-roughened hand to Cole. "You must be the gentleman young David here is so excited about," she said, her voice steady and firm. "I'm Margaret Patterson." David, so the kid had a name. Cole filed it away, shaking her hand. "Cole Matthews, ma'am. Your boy here made me quite an interesting proposition." Mrs. Patterson's eyes narrowed just a fraction. "He's not my boy exactly, though I care for him like he was. His mother, well, that's a long and sad story. The point is, Mr. Matthews, David's been through more than his share of disappointment. If you're planning on making promises you can't keep, I'd ask you to get on your horse and ride out of town right now." Her directness was like a splash of cold water. She was a protector, a guardian, and she was right to be suspicious of a man like him. "I understand your concern, ma'am," Cole said, his voice softer now, more honest. "Truth is, I lost a boy of my own, some years back. Maybe that's what's making me soft enough to consider this." He looked her straight in the eye, wanting her to see the truth of his next words. "But I give you my word, if you're comfortable with it, I'll look after David like he was my own flesh and blood, for as long as we're together." Something in his voice, some shared grief perhaps, seemed to reach her. She studied his face for a long moment, the hardness in her expression slowly softening. Finally, she gave a slow, deliberate nod. "David's been helping me around here for the better part of 2 years. He's a good boy, responsible, hard-working." She glanced down at David, who was watching them with breathless anticipation. "He's also been asking every single cowboy who comes through this town to teach him their trade. Maybe it's time someone finally said yes." She turned her gaze fully on David, a stern but loving look on her face. "You mind Mr. Matthews, you hear? Do exactly as he tells you, and don't you go making a nuisance of yourself." "Yes, ma'am," David practically shouted, his face glowing. "I'll be the best temporary son anyone ever had." Those words, temporary son, they hit Cole with the force of a stray bullet. He saw Benjamin's laughing face, felt the phantom weight of his small hand in his own. He remembered tucking him into bed with stories of brave cowboys, never once imagining that their own story would have such a tragic ending. But then he looked at David, at this boy so full of life and desperate hope, and he felt that flicker of purpose again, stronger this time. This was a mistake, yes, but maybe it was a mistake he needed to make. "All right then," Cole said, his voice thick with emotions he couldn't name. "First thing we need to do is get you properly outfitted. Can't have my—" He caught himself, the word son dying on his lips. "Can't have you riding without proper gear." The near slip did not go unnoticed. David's smile, impossibly, grew even wider. An hour later, they walked out of Henderson's store, a different boy in tow. David was now the proud owner of a sturdy new hat that shaded his eyes, a pair of leather riding gloves that he kept flexing and admiring, and a belt with a small, practical knife. "Not for protection," Cole had explained in a serious tone inside the store. "It's for the 100 small tasks that come up when you're working cattle. A good knife is a cowboy's best friend after his horse." David wore the new gear like a knight donning his first suit of armor, his back straight, his chin held high. The sight sent another pang of memory through Cole. The day he'd bought Benjamin his first little cowboy hat, the way he'd preened in front of the mirror for an hour. Cole had also used his savings to procure a gentle, sure-footed mare named Star for David to ride for the day. As they approached the horses, Cole stopped David with a hand on his shoulder. "Now," he said, his voice taking on the tone of a teacher, "lesson number 1 in being a cowboy. Always check your gear. Twice. A loose saddle, a frayed rope. Out here, small mistakes can get you killed. You understand?" David nodded, his earlier excitement now tempered with a solemn focus. He listened with rapt attention as Cole walked him through the pre-ride check, explaining the function of every strap and buckle on the saddle, the importance of checking the horse's hooves, the way to read a horse's mood through the flick of its ears. Cole found himself falling back into the role of a father, of a teacher, with an ease that both comforted and terrified him. He was showing David how to properly mount and dismount when he felt the boy's small hand briefly touch his arm. Thank you, Mr. Matthews, David said quietly. No one's ever taken the time to show me things like this before. A horse is your partner out here, Cole continued, gruffly clearing his throat to hide the emotion in his voice. You respect her, you care for her, you listen to her, and she'll take care of you in return. A good horse has saved more cowboys' lives than all the guns in the West. As they finally rode out of Copper Creek, the late afternoon sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the rugged landscape in brilliant strokes of gold and crimson. The silence between them was comfortable, filled only by the rhythmic clop of hooves on the dry earth and the whisper of the wind through sagebrush. Cole watched David out of the corner of his eye. The boy sat the horse with a natural ease that was surprising. There was no awkward bouncing, no nervous gripping of the reins. His posture was balanced, his hands were light, and he seemed to be in perfect sync with the mare's movements. It was the posture of someone who had spent more than a few minutes in a saddle. You've ridden before, Cole stated, making it a statement, not a question. David flushed, a faint pink color rising on his cheeks. A little, sir, he admitted, keeping his eyes forward. Mrs. Patterson lets me help with the horses at the boarding house sometimes, grooming and feeding and such. But I've never ridden with a real cowboy before, never learned the proper way of doing things. The answer was plausible enough, but a seed of suspicion was planted in Cole's mind. There was something more to this boy, something he wasn't saying. The way he scanned the horizon, the way he noticed a hawk circling high above, the way his questions weren't just the idle curiosity of a child, but pointed and intelligent questions about the terrain, about the signs of water, about the types of cattle they passed. He was a sponge, soaking it all in, but he seemed to know exactly what to ask. He was a mystery, this boy David, and Cole found himself increasingly drawn into solving it. As the sun kissed the horizon, they reached the shallow, slow-moving creek where Cole's small herd was gathered. The cattle, about 50 head, were scattered along the banks, their shapes dark silhouettes against the fiery sky. Now comes the real work, Cole said, dismounting and stretching his stiff legs. Cattle might look peaceful, but they've got minds of their own. The secret isn't to force them. It's to make them think that going where you want them to go was their idea all along. You've got to think like them. Anticipate their next move before they even know they're going to make it. David watched, his eyes wide and focused, as Cole moved with the quiet, fluid grace of a man who had spent a lifetime in this dance. He showed David how to use the horse's position, to apply gentle pressure, how to cut off a stray without spooking the herd, how to read the subtle language of a lowered head or a flicking tail. It was an art form, a subtle communication between man, horse, and herd. When Cole finally gestured for David to try and guide a few stragglers back to the main group, the boy didn't hesitate. He nudged Star forward, his small body mirroring the posture he'd seen Cole use. And to Cole's astonishment, he did it perfectly. He didn't rush. He didn't crowd the animal. He moved with a preternatural patience and understanding, gently coaxing the cow back toward the water. It wasn't the work of a beginner. It was the work of someone who had this in his blood. Where did you learn to do that? Cole asked, his voice low and serious. David just shrugged, a small, enigmatic smile on his face. You're a good teacher, Mr. Matthews. Later that night, as they sat by the crackling warmth of a campfire under a blanket of a million stars, the mystery of David deepened. Cole found himself talking more than he had in 7 years combined. He told stories of his early days on the trail, of stampedes and river crossings, of the harsh beauty and sudden dangers of the frontier. David listened with an unblinking intensity, his face illuminated by the dancing flames, hanging on every word. He was the perfect audience, asking just the right questions, his intelligence shining through with every comment. Were you ever scared? David asked, his voice soft in the vast dark silence of the desert night. Cole stared into the fire, the flames licking at a piece of dry mesquite. He thought of Benjamin's feverish face, of the terrifying helplessness of watching his child slip away. He thought of his wife, Sarah, her eyes filled with a grief that mirrored his own, in the crushing fear that he would never be able to fix what was broken between them. Every cowboy worth his salt gets scared sometimes, Cole admitted, his voice barely a whisper. The trick isn't to not be afraid. The trick is not letting the fear make your decisions for you. Courage. Courage isn't about not having fear. It's about doing what needs to be done, despite being afraid. David nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as if he were contemplating a great truth. My mother used to say something like that, he said quietly. She said that real bravery was loving someone, even when you knew it might hurt. The comment was so profound, so achingly adult, that it took Cole's breath away. Who was this kid? Who was this mysterious mother who had filled his head with such wisdom? Before Cole could form the question, David had unrolled his bedroll and curled up near the fire, the long, eventful day finally catching up to him. Within minutes, he was fast asleep. Cole sat there for hours, watching the boy's chest rise and fall in the steady rhythm of sleep. This child was a puzzle. His impossible request, his unnatural skill with horses and cattle, his wise beyond his years' observations. None of it added up. And the feeling of familiarity, it was stronger than ever now, a persistent hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. He felt a dangerous warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling of connection he had sworn he would never allow himself to feel again. For the first time in 7 long, empty years, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be, doing exactly what he was meant to do. The realization was the most terrifying thing of all, because tomorrow morning he was supposed to ride away, and he wasn't sure he could. Dawn in the desert arrived not with a bang, but with a slow, silent bloom of color on the eastern horizon. Cole woke with a stiff back and a sense of unease, the strange events of the previous day feeling like a dream. But the dream was real. David was already awake, moving with a quiet confidence around the horses. He wasn't playing. He was working, checking their legs for scrapes, refilling their water, murmuring to them in the soft, reassuring tones of an experienced hand. He moved with an economy of motion that continued to baffle Cole. "You're up early," Cole said, his voice a low rumble as he pushed himself up from his bedroll. "Couldn't sleep much," David replied, not quite meeting his eyes. "Too excited, I reckon." He gave Star a final pat on the neck. "Besides, Star here was getting a little restless. Thought she might need some attention." In the clear, pale light of morning, Cole saw something he'd missed in the firelight. There were dark circles under David's eyes, a faint, almost translucent quality to his skin. He looked fragile. "Are you feeling all right, son?" Cole asked, the word son slipping out naturally this time. "You look a mite peaked." "I'm fine," David said quickly. Too quickly. He forced a bright smile. "Just tired. This is the best adventure I've ever had, Mr. Matthews. I don't want to waste a minute of it sleeping." Despite his nagging worry, Cole couldn't help but smile back. The kids' enthusiasm was infectious. They ate a simple breakfast of coffee and beans as the sun climbed higher, setting the landscape ablaze with light. It was time to get to work. "Today," Cole explained, "we'll move the herd about 5 miles north. There's better pasture there. It's not exciting work. 90% of being a cowboy is just this: slow, steady, quiet work. You still interested in your adoption day?" David's face lit up as if Cole had offered him a bag of gold. "More than anything. But will you teach me to use a lasso today?" Cole chuckled, a genuine rusty sound. "I reckon we can work on that. But first, let's see how you handle a real cattle drive." As they began the slow, meandering work of nudging the herd north, Cole's admiration for David grew into outright disbelief. The boy was a natural. He seemed to have an instinct for it, an innate understanding of the herd's collective mind. He knew just when to apply pressure, just when to fall back, how to anticipate the movement of one cow that might lead the others astray. These were skills that took men years to learn. David seemed to have been born with them. It was uncanny. It was impossible. During a mid-morning break, while the cattle grazed contentedly in a small grassy valley, Cole decided he couldn't take the mystery any longer. He had to know. He dismounted and walked over to where David was checking Star's cinch. "All right, David," he said, his tone leaving no room for evasion. "We need to talk. Where did you really learn to work cattle like this? And I want the truth." David froze, his small hands still on the saddle. He hesitated for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the distant, shimmering horizon. Cole waited, letting the silence stretch. He could see a battle being waged inside the boy. Finally, David let out a long, slow breath and looked up at him, his blue eyes clouded with a sorrow that didn't belong in a child's face. "My mother," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She grew up on a ranch. Before things got complicated, she taught me some things. When I was little." The answer only led to more questions. "What kind of complications?" Cole pressed, his voice gentle but firm. David was quiet for a long time. He walked over to a small boulder and sat down, his shoulders slumped. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow, distant, as if he were reciting a story he had told himself 1,000 times. "She fell in love with a cowboy," he began. "A good man," she always said, "but a man who had his own demons to fight. They got married, they were happy, and then bad things happened." He paused, swallowing hard. "He lost their baby boy to sickness, and it broke something inside of him. He couldn't fix it. He started drinking. He started running from anything and everything that reminded him of what he'd lost. He couldn't bear to look at her, because she reminded him of the son they'd buried." David's voice trembled. "Eventually he ran from her too, just disappeared one morning without a word." Cole felt the ground drop out from under him. The air was punched from his lungs. Every word was a hammer blow, striking the raw, exposed nerve of his own past. He couldn't breathe. He couldn't think. It was his story. It was his exact story. He was the cowboy. He was the one who had run. "What? What happened to your mother?" Cole managed to choke out, his heart pounding against his ribs like a trapped bird. "She found out she was carrying another child," David said, his eyes now locked on Cole's. And in them, Cole saw a universe of pain and understanding. "Me?" But the cowboy was long gone by then, and she was too proud, or maybe just too hurt, to track him down. "She moved from town to town, taking whatever work she could find to keep us going. But she never stopped loving him. She never stopped telling me stories about him, about the good man he was before the sadness broke him. She never stopped hoping he'd find his way back to her someday." David's voice cracked, and a single tear traced a clean path through the dust on his cheek. "She got sick about 6 months ago. Real sick. The doctor in the last town, he said there wasn't much time left, but she told me she had one last thing she needed to do." Cole's heart was a roaring inferno in his chest. He was shaking, a tremor starting in his hands and spreading through his entire body. He knew what was coming, but he needed to hear it. He needed the final nail to be driven home. "What was that?" he whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. David stood up and took a step toward him. He looked directly into Cole's eyes, and for the first time, Cole didn't just see a familiar feature or a shared mannerism. He saw himself. He saw his own blue eyes staring back at him from the face of a child he never knew existed. "She sent me to find my father," David said, his voice suddenly clear and strong. "She gave me all the money she had left for a stagecoach ticket and a map, and she told me to look for a cowboy named Cole Matthews, who might be working the ranches around a little town called Copper Creek." The world didn't just stop spinning. It shattered into a million pieces. Cole stared at the boy, his son, and felt the full weight of 7 years of running, 7 years of regret, 7 years of lonely, wasted nights come crashing down on him. The familiar features, the skill with horses, the blue eyes, the impossible, terrible, wonderful truth of it all slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. He staggered back a step, his hand going to his chest as if to hold his breaking heart together. "Your mother," Cole whispered, his voice ragged. What was her name?" "Sarah," David said, and now the tears were flowing freely down his face, mirroring the ones that had begun to burn Cole's own eyes. "Sarah Elizabeth Chen. She kept your last name for a while after you left. But then she changed it back when she finally realized you weren't coming back. Sarah, his Sarah, beautiful, patient, strong Sarah, with her warm laugh that could chase away the darkest moods and her gentle hands that had held him together when he was falling apart." Sarah, who had stood by him through the bottomless grief of losing Benjamin. Sarah, who had begged him to stay, to let her help him heal. Sarah, who had deserved a prince and had gotten a coward who had run away and left her to face the world alone, with his child, his son. A sob, raw and ugly, tore its way out of Cole's throat. He fell to his knees in the dust and pulled David into his arms, burying his face in the boy's sandy hair. He held on as if he were a drowning man, and this child was the only piece of solid land in a raging sea. Years of pent-up grief, of guilt, of regret, and a sudden, overwhelming, fierce love crashed over him in a devastating flood. "Son," he choked out, the word a prayer and a confession. "My boy, I'm so sorry. I am so damn sorry I wasn't there." They knelt there in the middle of the vast, indifferent desert, a father and a son united at last by a truth that was both a miracle and a tragedy. When they finally, hesitantly, pulled apart, Cole cupped David's face in his shaking hands, his gaze tracing every line, every feature. Trying to memorize this face he should have known his whole life. "We're going back," Cole said, his voice thick with a new, fierce determination. "We're going back to town. Right now. I need to send a telegram. I need to find your mother. We'll let her know I found you, that you found me, and then we are going to figure out how to be a family. I swear it." He was already planning it. He would sell the cattle. He would find Sarah. He would spend the rest of his life making it up to her, to both of them. He had a second chance. It was a miracle. A second chance he didn't deserve, but one he would seize with both hands. But David was shaking his head, a fresh wave of tears spilling down his pale cheeks. He looked at his father, his expression one of profound, heartbreaking sorrow. "We can't, Pa," he whispered, the name slipping out so naturally it shattered what was left of Cole's heart. She's already gone." The hope, the miraculous, impossible hope that had flared to life in Cole's chest, was extinguished in an instant. "What?" he breathed. "She died 2 weeks ago, right after I left to find you." David's voice was small, broken. "Mrs. Patterson got the telegram yesterday. She didn't know how to tell me." The words were like cannonballs, each one blasting a new hole in his soul. Sarah was gone, the woman he had loved and abandoned, the woman who had carried his child, raised him alone, and whose last act on this earth was to send that child across a dangerous country to find the very man who had broken her heart. She was gone, and he would never get the chance to say he was sorry. He would never get to tell her she was right. He would never get to thank her for the incredible gift she had sent him. The weight of it was crushing, a physical pressure that made it hard to breathe. He had been too late. 7 years too late. He thought in that moment that this was the worst pain a man could possibly feel. The absolute bottom of grief's dark canyon. But then David looked at him, his blue eyes swimming with a terror that was far too old for his years, and he delivered the final, devastating blow. "But that's not the worst of it, Pa," David whispered, his voice growing fainter, weaker. "The sickness she had, the doctor said it runs in families sometimes. The coughing, the weakness." He took a ragged, rattling breath. "I have it too. He said I probably have a few months, at most." The desert floor seemed to fall away, leaving Cole suspended in a silent, screaming void. No, no, it couldn't be true. The world tilted on its axis, the sun turning cold, the sky turning to lead. He had just found his son. He had just been given this impossible, miraculous gift, only to have it ripped away in the same breath. The boy's strange request, "Adopt me for just one day." It wasn't a child's fantasy. It was a dying wish. He hadn't been asking for a temporary father. He had been asking for a father for the only time he had left. "No," Cole whispered, the word a raw, desperate plea to a merciless God. "No, that can't be right. We'll find another doctor, a better doctor. I'll get money. We'll get you the best care there is." David offered him a small, sad smile, a smile of infinite wisdom and resignation that had no place on the face of a 10-year-old boy. "I know you would, Pa. he said softly, reaching out and placing his small hand on Cole's arm. But I can see it in your eyes. You know I'm right. That's why I wanted to find you so bad. Why I asked you to adopt me for just one day. I just, I just wanted to know what it felt like. To have a father who cared about me before he couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Cole understood with a horrifying, soul-crushing clarity. This perfect, miraculous day was not a beginning. It was a goodbye. The ride back to Copper Creek was a journey through a dreamscape of grief and love. The sun beat down. The landscape was the same. The cattle still needed to be moved, but everything had changed. The world was now defined by a ticking clock, each second that passed an unbearable loss. Cole's mind, which had been a chaotic storm of shock and denial, slowly settled into a single, sharp point of focus. Time. He had so little of it. How could he possibly pack a lifetime of fatherhood into a few hours, a few weeks, a few months? What could he possibly give this boy that would be enough? He looked over at David, riding silently beside him on the gentle mare, Star. The boy looked exhausted, the emotional toll of his confession having drained the last of his reserves. The paleness Cole had noticed that morning was more pronounced now, a fragile porcelain quality to his skin. But his back was straight, and his eyes, though shadowed with sadness, were still fixed on his father with a look of pure, unadulterated love. "Tell me about her," Cole said, his voice hoarse, breaking the long silence between them. "Tell me about your mother. Tell me everything." And David did. As they rode slowly, letting the herd graze as they moved, David painted a picture of Sarah Matthews Chen. He spoke of her laugh, the way it filled their small, rented rooms in dusty railroad towns. He described the stories she told him every night. Stories of a brave cowboy who was the best man she had ever known, a man who had simply lost his way in a storm of grief. She had never spoken of Cole with bitterness or anger, only with a deep, abiding love and a faith that, somewhere out in the vast wilderness, the good man she had married was still alive. David told him about the songs she sang, the way she could make a feast out of beans and cornbread, her fierce protectiveness, her unwavering belief in him. With every story, every shared memory, Cole felt the immense weight of the years he had missed. He had been so wrapped up in his own pain, so convinced that he was protecting Sarah by staying away, that he had never once considered he was robbing her of a partner and robbing this incredible child of a father. He had been a fool, a coward, and his cowardice had cost them everything. As they neared the outskirts of town, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the trail, David was seized by a violent fit of coughing. It was a deep, rattling, ugly sound that seemed to tear through his small body. Cole was off his horse in an instant, pulling David down from his saddle and holding him tight until the spasm passed. He held his son in his arms, feeling the terrifying fragility of his frame, the alarming heat of a low-grade fever radiating from his skin. He felt a helplessness so profound it was like drowning, a rage against the universe so hot it threatened to consume him. When the coughing subsided, David lay limp against his father's chest, his breathing shallow and ragged. "I need you to know something, Pa," he whispered, his voice weak. Today, today was the best day of my whole life. Having a Pa, even just for a little while, it was worth everything." Cole pulled his son closer, his own tears falling silently into the boy's hair. He breathed in the scent of dust and sun and youth, trying to burn this moment into his memory forever. The weight of him, the feel of his small hand gripping his shirt, the sound of his labored breath. "You're the best thing I've ever done," Cole whispered back, his voice thick with unshed tears. "Even though I didn't know I was doing it. You and your mother, you were my greatest blessing, and I was too broken to see it." As the sun began its final descent, painting their last hours of this one perfect, heartbreaking day in hues of golden fire, Cole Matthews finally understood the truth Sarah had known all along. That courage wasn't about running from pain. It was about staying. It was about showing up for the people who needed you, even when it hurt. Love wasn't diminished by loss. It was made infinitely more precious by it. He had been given a gift, a terrible, beautiful, fleeting gift. He had found his son. He had been given the chance to know him, to love him, to be his father. And though he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, how their story would end, he also knew that he would not run again. He would stay. He would treasure every remaining moment, every word, every shared look, every breath they had left together under the vast, silent, frontier sky. Tomorrow and all the tomorrows after would bring a grief beyond all measure. But today, for these last few precious hours, Cole Matthews was exactly who he was meant to be. He was David's father, and that would have to be enough. 3 months later, Cole Matthews stood on a small, windswept hill overlooking Copper Creek. A simple wooden cross stood before him, stark against the blue sky. His hat was in his hands, his face was etched with a sorrow so deep it seemed to have become part of his bones. But beneath the grief, there was something new, something that looked from a distance like peace. "Well, son," he said quietly, his voice carried away by the wind that whispered through the dry grass. He was speaking to the name carved into the wood, David Matthews, beloved son and bridge between hearts. "I did what you asked. I stayed." The 3 months had been both an eternity and the blink of an eye. They had been filled with doctors who confirmed the terrible diagnosis, and with quiet days spent not on the trail, but on the porch of the boarding house. Mrs. Patterson, a woman whose gruff exterior hid a heart of pure gold, had taken them both in without a second thought. Cole had spent every waking moment with his son. He taught him how to properly use a lasso, how to read the stars, how to carve a piece of wood into the shape of a horse. In return, David had taught him how to live. He taught him that joy could be found in the taste of a fresh-baked pie, that wonder could be found in the flight of a hawk, that love could heal the deepest of wounds. They didn't talk much about the future. They didn't need to. They filled the present with so much life that there was no room for the shadow that loomed over them. Mrs. Patterson had given Cole the letter Sarah had left behind. One for David, full of love and stories of the father he was about to meet, and one for Cole. It wasn't a letter of anger or recrimination. It was a letter of forgiveness. A letter that told him she had always loved him, had always understood the grief that had driven him away, and that her final wish was for her son to know his father and for his father to find his way home. She had believed in him right up to the very end. "Your mother was right about me," Cole whispered to the wooden cross, the wind drying the tears on his weathered cheeks. "I was a good man who'd lost his way. But you, son, you were the one who helped me find it again. One day, that's all it took. One perfect day with my boy." After David was gone, the silence he left behind was deafening. The urge to run, to climb on his horse and disappear back into the wilderness, was a physical craving. It was the old instinct, the coward's way out. But he didn't run. He stayed. For David, for Sarah, for himself. He sold his small herd of cattle and used the money, his savings from 7 years of aimless wandering, to establish a small fund at the Copper Creek Church, dedicated to helping orphan children in the territory. He took a permanent job as a foreman at the ranch just outside of town, finding a quiet solace in the hard work and the familiar rhythms of the life he'd once fled. He even found himself mentoring some of the younger ranch hands, boys full of the same eager spirit he had seen in David. He was no longer a ghost. He was Cole Matthews, a man with a past, yes, but also a man with a purpose. He lived each day with an intention he hadn't known before, never letting a sunset pass without tipping his hat to the western horizon and remembering the son who had saved him. As he turned to walk back down the hill toward the town he now called home, a sudden gust of wind swirled around him, and for just a fleeting, impossible moment, he could have sworn he heard the faint echo of a boy's laughter. He felt a phantom touch, the ghost of a small hand slipping into his own. He had learned the hardest lesson of all. Some adoptions, the ones that truly matter, last forever, even if they only last for a day. If this story of a father's love and a son's incredible courage touched your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Every subscription helps us bring more stories like this to light. And if you believe that even the briefest connections can change a life forever, hit that like button. We have a question for you, and we'd love to see your answer in the comments below. What do you think was the greatest gift that David gave to Cole? Was it the gift of a second chance, the gift of forgiveness, or simply the gift of one perfect day? Thank you for joining us on this journey. Until next time, may your own trails lead you to unexpected blessings.